Welcome back, everyone. This is the Oracle Decodes, the birth of Jesus, Christmas, and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, part 2. We're going to pick up where we left off in our last decoding. The Oracle decodes the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and what Jesus has to do with it. So if you haven't seen that piece yet, go ahead and check that one out. And I also recommend that you take a look at some of our decodings of the Tarot deck, especially those where we've been recently learning about the cycle of the planet Venus. The specific decoding where we looked at the Oracle decodes, the Devil, Satan, and Lucifer will be especially helpful as we get into this piece here, because we're going to be building upon the mind-blowing information we've already learned in these pieces, and of course tying it together here with even more new and fabulous discoveries to share in this one. So remember from our last decoding, we were beginning to learn about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, or what is called the Great Conjunction, and taking a look at the one that's occurring this winter solstice on what we commonly call December 21st of 2020. As you can see from the screenshot from Stellarium, it's this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that's occurring just below the constellation of Capricorn the Goat over the western horizon of the Earth. You may also remember from our last piece that we learned that this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that occurs approximately every 20 years does not always occur in the same constellation or the same season or time of day. And for the decoding of the story of Jesus in our last piece, we learned that it's when specifically this great conjunction is aligned with the constellation of Cetus the Whale, as we call it nowadays, is where we're going to find the story of the young Jesus, right? As we looked at in the last piece, from the story of Jesus' time when he was 12 to the time where he's 30 in the book of Luke. Now, it's the same great conjunction alignment that we're looking at again in this piece, as we go back to where the story of Jesus begins now, with the story of his birth, celebrated famously by Christians as Christmas on what we commonly call December 25th of every year. So let's get into decoding this, because it's mind-blowing and there's quite a bit to it. So we're going to dive in here. In this screenshot, we're looking at Christmas Day of what we commonly call the year 1940, where we find that this great conjunction alignment of Jupiter and Saturn we're looking for, where the approximate 12-year cycle of the planet Jupiter meets with the approximate 30-year cycle of the planet Saturn, specifically in the constellation of Cetus the Whale, is happening. But in this story, Cetus is the baby Jesus, born on Christmas Day. But there's also one more element of the story to bring in, and that will be how this story also reconciles the cycle of great conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn in Cetus also to the 8-year cycle of the planet Venus as well. So as you can see on Christmas Day in the year we commonly call 1940, we've got a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Cetus. And then when you move the sky story a few hours ahead on that same Christmas night, you find that the planet Venus is rising over the eastern horizon of the Earth, ahead of the sunrise, while the constellation of Orion is going down in the west, following the light of Jupiter and Saturn, or the Great Conjunction, while the light of the planet Venus is shining over in the east. Just like we will also see with this year's Great Conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. The element that's missing this year is that this year's Great Conjunction is in the constellation of Capricorn. So it's missing that correct alignment to tell the story of the baby Jesus. But it does have the element required for this story as well, the birth of the baby Jesus. It's the rising of the planet Venus before the sun on Christmas as well. So we're going to get into this and pull this all together. The rising of the planet Venus over the eastern horizon ahead of the sun on Christmas, after the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Cetus, doesn't always happen this way with every great conjunction either. Sometimes this great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn does happen in Cetus, but sometimes Venus doesn't come up then afterwards ahead of the sun a few hours later in the east. So it's specifically the lining up of all of these elements that we're looking for to properly decode for the very first time, the story of the birth of Jesus. We're also going to find out here what the music industry, quote-unquote, superstar, Prince, was really talking about in his song that also became the title of his album of the same name, 1999, where Prince was telling everyone to party like it's 1999, and we all thought it was all about celebrating the end of the millennium and the birth of a new one on the calendar. Well, it's going to turn out here that Prince knew it was about something much bigger than just that. So we're looking here at Christmas Day in what we commonly call the year of 1999, and wouldn't you just know it, there is a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn found in alignment with Cetus. Take a look at Prince's 1999 album cover with the background of stars. And isn't it most interesting, all those eyes you can see in the nines and the big eye in the middle of the eye in his name, Prince. And here's Prince in one of his famous poses while playing his guitar, posed up exactly like the constellation of our old friend Orion, right? With one arm over his head, pointing to the crown of Auriga over his head. Looking exactly from where Prince took his name to honor this timeless royal figure in the sky, Orion, right? Usually found in these stories we're decoding, playing a king. But in this one, he's called a prince. And instead of the usual bow we find Orion holding, this prince is playing a guitar instead. Prince's guitar is shaped supposedly like that weird, unpronounceable symbol that he was going by, right, when he was having contract problems with his record company over his name. He was, at that time, known as the artist formerly known as Prince, and it was this symbol that was shown when that title was said. Looking at it now, isn't it an obvious reference to the Eye of Horus, now that you look at it with this new perspective? And Prince told us that this unpronounceable symbol he created was the combination of commonly known symbols of the planet Mars and the planet Venus, representing oftentimes also the masculine and feminine energies as well. So this is definitely a layered meaning that's being communicated with this symbol. And it was also foreshadowing Prince's death act farce and his soon after resurrection as his own sister that was never heard of before then. But those are things better left perhaps for one of our private videos. But for this one, that symbol of Prince's is also encoding for the cycle of the planet Venus, reconciled to this great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Cetus. Prince was telling everyone to party like it's 1999 because he knew that it would be the last great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Cetus, where Venus also rises a few hours later in the east, ahead of the sun on Christmas Day. And this would be the last one that would be happening for a very, very long time. This very special birth story in the sky that Prince was talking about was about a baby born on Christmas Day who was later known as the Prince of Peace, Jesus. And this special alignment happens on Christmas of 1999, and I couldn't find it happening again for almost 700 more years. So from the story of Jesus given in the New Testament of the Bible, we are told that Jesus was born here on earth in a place called Bethlehem. So let's head over to Wikipedia and start out there with some information we can find about Bethlehem that will be useful for our decoding here. And some of the information, we're also going to be laying down a lot of foundational pieces here for what's going to come in future decodings as well. So Wikipedia tells us that the origin of Bethlehem comes from Arabic, Beit Lam, meaning house of meat, and in Hebrew, Bethlehem, meaning house of bread. And then the word went through Greek and Latin pronunciations, and Bethlehem was thought to have been initially named after a Canaanite fertility god, Lehem. So this is right away another mention of Canaanites in these stories that we've been decoding. Most recently, we took a look at this in the story of Abraham. Remember when we were taking a look at the story of he was still Abram and she was still Sarai at that point in the story. But when Abram and Sarai were convincing their slave Hagar to make an heir for them. So the part of the story where Sarai convinces Abram to go in with her Egyptian slave Hagar to create an heir for the two of them, it's mentioned in the story specifically that this happened after Abram dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, remember. So this is something that we're going to get a lot more deeply into in upcoming decodings as well. So Wikipedia tells us that the earliest mention of Bethlehem goes back to between 1350 and 1330 of what we call is before the Common Era, when the town was inhabited by the Canaanites. The Hebrew Bible tells us that Bethlehem was where David was from, where he was crowned king of Israel, and is located as the birthplace of Jesus in both the books of Matthew and the book of Luke in the New Testament of the Bible. Now remember also that in Jesus' given lineage that the book of Luke lists that we took a look at in our last decoding, Jesus' lineage goes all the way back through King David here, all the way back to Adam and Eve of Genesis. But it's through their son Seth, not through Adam and Eve's first two sons in the story of Genesis, Cain and Abel. So I just wanted to point that out, and we're going to get a lot more into that down the road, and also when we get back to the Canaanites more deeply. We're just going to brush the surface about those things here. All right, so Wikipedia tells us that the city of Bethlehem was destroyed by the Roman Emperor Hadrian during the 2nd century Bar Kokhba revolt. And the Bar Kokhba revolt is part of a very long Jewish rebellion, primarily against Rome. Later, Bethlehem's rebuilding was prompted by the Roman Empress Helena, who was the mother of Constantine the Great, who commissioned the building of the Great Church of the Nativity in what we commonly call 327. Now, what Wikipedia doesn't say here, but that we're definitely going to be taking a look at, I'm sure, coming in future decodings, is that Constantine the Great was the Roman emperor who called together something known as the Nicean Council. It's the same council who determined by their votes which books of the Bible would be made into the official canon and which books of the Bible would not. The Emperor Constantine was also the Roman emperor, or the Caesar, who made Christianity the state religion of Rome. Constantine was also a descendant of the Flavians, the Roman Caesars who originally laid siege to Jerusalem, putting down this Jewish rebellion against Rome at the time when the Roman general Vespasian and his son Titus destroyed for the second time the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And from this event, Vespasian and then his two sons after him became the Roman emperors, and they were all of the surname or last name of Flavius, the same surname Constantine the Great shared with his descendants, something that we're definitely going to get deeper into in future decodings. Wikipedia continues about Bethlehem and the Church of the Nativity there, that after being badly damaged during a revolt in what we commonly call 529, that it was rebuilt a century later by the Roman Emperor Justinian I, who was also, by the way, another Roman emperor with the last name of Flavius. And this Flavian was also responsible for giving us all the codified system of civil Roman law that we still derive our theater system that's been written down into script system of law being used today. But it's this kind of thing that is probably going to be something that we're going to have to leave for private videos to get deeper into. So Wikipedia goes on to tell us a quick history of Bethlehem from here. From Muslim conquest in what we commonly call 637 to what we commonly call 1099, Muslim rule of Bethlehem continued, where they booted out the Greek Orthodox clergy and replaced them with a Latin one. Control of Bethlehem was passed to the British, from the Ottomans at the end of World War I. And after 2 more wars, Bethlehem is, since what we call commonly 1995, under the administration of the Palestinian Authority. So this is a pretty rough story for the given birthplace of Jesus, right? Where today you can find a continuing fleeing of Bethlehem because of the ongoing religious and political conflicts attributed primarily to Muslims and Christians in the region. Here's what Wikipedia tells us about Bethlehem from the earliest reference of it during this Canaanite period and how this ties back into Egypt. It says here that the Egyptian-appointed governor of Jerusalem appeals for the aid of the Pharaoh in Egypt to help with some rebel mercenaries in Bethlehem. And he asks the Pharaoh to send archers, of course, right? He asks to send archers to help get rid of these mercenaries. Then it gives us a bit more about the Canaanite god of fertility called Lehem, and it's going to tie back in here in this next piece. So in the 3rd century millennium BC, so before our current Gregorian calendar, our current Anno Domini or AD, Year of Our Lord timeline that we're on today, so thousands of years prior to what we are told is the birth of Jesus, the Canaanites erected a temple on the hill, now known as the Hill of the Nativity, probably dedicated to Lehem. The temple, and subsequently the town that formed around it, would have been known as Bethlehem. Biblical scholar William F. Albright notes that the pronunciation of the name remained the same for 3,500 years, but it meant different things. Quote, the temple of God Lakmu, or later Lehem in Canaanite, house of bread in Hebrew and Aramaic, and house of meat in Arabic. Under the classical period heading about Bethlehem, Wikipedia tells us this, that although there's contradictions found within the Bible about the birth story of Jesus, that both the books of Matthew and Luke tell us that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And also that the 4th century church historian Eusebius mentions a cave in Bethlehem where Jesus was supposedly born. After the Bar Kokhba revolt that happened around what we commonly call 132 to 136, again, remember, this is a Jewish revolt, a long rebellion, primarily against Rome here. But we're told that this Christian site, it was said, was converted by the Roman Emperor Hadrian into a shrine dedicated to the Greek god Adonis to honor his favorite, the Greek youth Antonius. Now, what Wikipedia doesn't say is that this Emperor Hadrian then is publicly making it known what I will say is his inappropriate fondness for children. Because the Greek god Adonis and his favorite youth Antonius is actually a story about something that was practiced in ancient Greek culture, among others, something that I call an inappropriate relationship or fondness for children, but they use the term pederasty. And because of ever-increasing limits on what can be said on social media platforms, things like these ties we may only be able to address in private videos, but they are very important ties to comprehend nonetheless in the overall picture here of this cult that is hiding this knowledge over our heads and in plain sight today. It's their religious law, or their cult's law, that they're ritually following, and it goes back to a very ancient past. Wikipedia goes on. Around the year we commonly call 395, the church father Jerome wrote in a letter, Bethlehem, now belonging to us, was overshadowed by a grove of Tammuz, that is to say, Adonis. And in the cave where once the infant Christ cried, the lover of Venus was lamented. Many scholars have taken this letter as evidence that the cave of the Nativity, over which the Church of the Nativity was built, at one point was a shrine to the ancient Near Eastern fertility god, Tammuz. Now, what this doesn't tell you is that the story involving Tammuz takes us back right to the very first culture to have invented writing, the Sumerians, later known throughout time as the Assyrians, the Akkadians, Canaanites, Phoenicians. And it's where the story of Tammuz, where it just says here, the lover of Venus, that's where the story goes back to. And although Wikipedia doesn't mention Tammuz's lover's name, it is the ancient Sumerian goddess called Inanna. And this story of Inanna and Tammuz, we will most definitely be getting much deeper into, but it does tie in overall here, as you'll see, to this birth story of Jesus as well, even with this ancient of a past. So let's look now at those specific places in the Bible where Bethlehem is named as the birthplace of Jesus, starting with the King James Version of the Bible found on a site called BibleGateway.com. We're going to start with Matthew chapter 2. It reads, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for this it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, for out of these shall come a governor that shall rule my people of Israel. Then Herod, when he had privily called these wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared." So King Herod is asking these wise men, these priests and astrologers, about what will later be known as the Star of Bethlehem. Matthew chapter 2 verse 8 goes on, "And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word, so that I may worship him also. When they had heard the king, they departed, and in the star which they saw in the east, went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they came into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh." And these are images of frankincense and myrrh trees that you're looking at here on the screen, just so that you can take a look at how these specific trees are shaped. So let's look at Luke chapter 2 now for what it says there. And remember from our last decoding of the Oracle Decodes, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and what Jesus has to do with it. It is this story of Jesus that was told in the book of Luke that we've just decoded, but we started at the point where Jesus was 12 years old, and then he jumps to the age of 30 in the story. So now we're going to look at just before that in Luke chapter 2, where it begins, beginning telling the story of the birth of Jesus. "And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And they were in the same country shepherds, abiding in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. And the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone about them, and they were sore afraid." So just note, we start out here already with more ties to Rome, and a decree coming from the Roman Caesar about the law in regards to taxes and money, clashing with Jewish beliefs. And this is something we're told that Jesus more or less, you could say, stood up against when we're presented the story about him later of him chasing the money changers out of the temple. But then there is also this, what appears to be conflicting stand about Jesus' stand on all of this when he tells his own disciples to render unto Caesar what is Caesar. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's in regards to money and taxes. So we're going to get into clearing that confusion up perhaps down the road in a future decoding, but just something to take note of right here. So Luke chapter 2 verse 10 goes on, "And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly hosts, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, and goodwill toward men. And it came to pass, as the angels were gone away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, Let us go now even unto Bethlehem, and see this thing which has come to pass, which the Lord hath made known unto us." So here they're called shepherds, where in Matthew they were wise men who were sent out. Just take note of that. So verse 16 goes on, "And they came with haste, and found Mary and Joseph and the babe lying in a manger. And when they had seen it, they made known abroad the saying which was told them concerning the child. And all that heard it wondered at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, and glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, as it was told unto them. And when the 8 days were accomplished for circumcision of the child, his name was called Jesus, which so named of the angel before he was conceived in the womb." And we're going to be getting more into this whole ritual of circumcision as well, coming up in a future decoding. So we're going to leave that one right there. Verse 22 from Luke chapter 2 goes on. "And when the days of her purification, according to the law of Moses, were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that openeth the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. And to offer sacrifice, according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons." Here's an image of what you can see a turtle dove looks like. Looking just a little bit like a smaller falcon, right? Take note of that. All right, so we've got all we need now to queue up a screenshot from Stellarium again and decode this story with the help of what we've discovered and have been calling the real oracle or the real all-seeing eye in the sky. So we've all likely heard Prince's song, 1999, and now that we know that he was really singing about this specific alignment we're going to decode here, let's take a look again at Christmas, the birthday of Jesus, as it's celebrated by Christians today. The last time that we're going to see this specific alignment that we're decoding here is going to be not until almost 700 years later. So this alignment, again, is a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn located in the constellation of Cetus on Christmas, and in combination with the planet Venus, coming up over the eastern horizon of the Earth a few hours later, prior to the rising sun. So it's the planet Venus's 8-year cycle, remember, that forms the inverted pentagram in the underworld above Orion's or the Devil's Head when we're tracking Venus's cycle during the summer solstice. So this is why, although that you often see stars represented when they're drawn, right, or used in art, they have a varying number of points. But most often when you see a star, it's a 5-pointed star. And that's often associated with what you find on top of Christmas trees as well. Something also very similar to what you can see on the municipal seal for the modern-day city of Bethlehem. This 5-pointed star is in direct correspondence to the planet Venus and is tying into this story. Because as we move forward to another great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, found in the constellation of Cetus on Christmas of what we commonly call the year 2059, as you move forward a few hours later that same day, there's no sign of the planet Venus rising over the eastern horizon in the sky. And that's because Venus is still in the underworld, or down in hell with the devil. So this alignment isn't an exact match then to the Christ being born story. But as we'll definitely be getting into future decodings, this looks like to be the sign of the false prophet, or the Antichrist, where we've got a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Cetus, but it's not followed by Venus rising before the sun in the east during Christmas. So Prince was telling us to party in 1999 because he knew it was the last time that we're going to see this correct Christ alignment. At least I couldn't find it happening again until the year we may commonly call 2675, so almost 700 years later. Where we find the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Cetus on Christmas, with Venus rising a few hours later before the sun over the Earth's horizon in the east. All right, so we're going to look back at a correct sky story picture of the birth of Jesus story just to make this easiest to see. We're looking at Christmas of the year we commonly call the year 1940, where we do have Cetus, as it's known nowadays, but for this story, looking like that big baby in the sky to many ancient peoples, as we've seen in previous decodings, this is the baby Jesus, right at the special cross of the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic, or found on the hill of the Nativity, with the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn right above his head. But first, connect why Bethlehem is called the house of bread in Hebrew and Aramaic. Can't you see a loaf of bread in the bottom part of Cetus, and what became a Eucharist wafer, symbolizing the transubstantiated body of Christ when is ritually eaten by Christian believers in the head of Cetus as well? This is how the birthplace of Jesus got its Hebrew name, Bethlehem, house of bread. The wise men in Matthew and the shepherds in Luke, this corresponds to the constellation of our old friend Orion, not only interpreted in many stories as being an archer holding a bow. Here, he's a shepherd with his outstretched hand, maybe in combination with Auriga, his shepherd's crook. Now, there are usually 3 wise men in the Christmas carols that are being sung about this story, and that corresponds to Orion's 3 belt stars, or it may be just the constellation of Orion itself in combination with the constellation of Gemini, found over Orion's shoulder, his constant traveling companions, and the camels that these wise men were thought to ride through the desert following the Star of Bethlehem, or the Great Conjunction. Those camels are what we call nowadays the constellation of Monoceros, or the unicorn that Orion rides in the sky. The Star of Bethlehem, the Magi, as they're sometimes called, were following the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Cetus on Christmas. And the Magi is where we get the word magic and magician from. Another correspondence shown in the number 1 card of the tarot deck, which we've already previously decoded, is the constellation of Orion on the summer solstice. Orion in this story is playing Joseph, Jesus' earthly father as well. The gifts that the Magi bring the baby Jesus include frankincense and myrrh, chosen, as you can see, to correspond to the way that these appear to look on Earth, looking like the combination of both the location of the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic cross and the constellation of Pisces, found there with it, just above Cetus, or the baby Jesus, looking like it's under the branches of frankincense and myrrh trees. The constellation of Taurus is on the other side of what we can call Nativity Hill here. Taurus, by the way that it's shaped, was often imagined by ancient storytellers to be a woman in labor or giving birth to that big sky baby, Cetus. Or in this sky story, Mary is playing Taurus, the mother of the baby Jesus. Jesus was born in a manger, depicted often in this scene, with Jesus, Mary, and Joseph surrounded by animals. Yes, as you can see, the manger that Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the sky, is that very special area that we've been calling the real all-seeing eye, and it's filled, as you can see, with lots of celestial animals, including even the Lamb of God, as Jesus has been known to be called. Cetus, once again, being reimagined to look like yet another animal, a lamb. The angel of the Lord, or the angel of God, we see again as we've previously decoded in a few different decodings. It's the constellation of Aquarius, with the trail of stars from Aquarius's back being the wings, perhaps, but it also might be in combination with the constellation of Pisces, as we've seen before, looking to many storytellers like outstretched wings in flight. The sacrifice given to God after Jesus' circumcision was 2 turtle doves. Those same turtle doves sung about in the Christmas carol, the 12 Days of Christmas. The combination of Cetus and Pisces, the ancient Egyptians called the falcon-headed god Horus, right at the cross of the pear tree, with the partridge in it too. Doesn't that partridge look a lot like a falcon and the eye of Horus too? So we've got this Jesus' birth story pretty much covered here, but for the last element to bring in here, the planet Venus, sometimes also known as Lucifer, as we've already looked at. So to tie this in and fully decode this story for the first time, let's go to the next time that this special Christ alignment occurs again, almost 700 years apart, so to the Christmas of 2675, where the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, or the Star of Bethlehem, is in alignment with Cetus on Christmas. The baby Jesus is born, tied by Eridanus to Orion in the sky. Orion as Jesus, as the man, crowned by Auriga. And in the story, Jesus is said to have been crowned King of the Jews. So in the sky story is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction goes below the western horizon of the Earth. And as you can see, Cetus has followed. This corresponds to the baby Jesus being delivered to Earth. And the man, the king, he will grow to become Orion, as you can see in the sky story, even in the darkness, has the brightest lights in the heavens to guide his way. He is never in darkness, not even in the darkest of all dark nights of the winter solstice time of the year that we're looking at here. Even when the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction has dipped out of view from our perspective on Earth in the west, while Orion is setting as well, it's the light of the planet Venus that is shining behind him, bathing Orion in her light, even before the sun comes up in the east, where everything begins. That's why David also, and remember David, King David, was also born in Bethlehem. In Psalm 23, David too could walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil, because it's easy to play a prophet when you've already read the script. You're already on the same page, and you've been given the same lines. Amazing to see so much light in this new way, isn't it? And with that, I think this is a great place to end this one, and we'll pick things back up in our next decoding. Until then, Be well.